Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black Man Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, the Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday, January the 18th, 2023. Jimmy, and if it is Wednesday night,
It is Black Man Speak. So, Tom, let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. If you haven't already, please hit that like button, the notification button, and subscribe to our channel and help spread the word. We're still having some issues with YouTube, shadow banning our show. So, we're going to do this the old fashioned way, Tom, and get the word out verbally and have people to come join and watch the show. So, Tom, with that being said, let's introduce our topic for tonight and let's jump in.
well, Jimmy, there is a lot going on in the news, but with this past Monday being a national holiday, the first national holiday to my knowledge that is celebrated from one of the greats of our community, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We're going to talk about the legacy of Dr. King, his lasting impact on not just the United States, but the world. And then we're going to shift to another story, Jimmy, that I've been tracking recently that very few people seem to be talking about. You'll see a couple of things here and there, and that is the ongoing crisis in the country of Haiti. Most people may know that I guess it's been a little bit over a year and a half now that the president of Haiti was assassinated. But there is even more going on right now, Jimmy, where really the last of the democratically elected legislators of that country have their terms have expired. There has been no democratic or publicly free elections
Yeah, there
since.
have been no elections.
Exactly. And so, Jimmy, that would be the equivalent of Joe Biden being assassinated, and then all of the legislators in Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives literally being gone. And that's what's running our country. So we're going to talk about that in the second half of the show, Jimmy, but we're going to start off with the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. And, for those of you who are sports fans, I know that, Jimmy, you're a big sports fan, and I am as well. We want to give a shout out to those fans whose teams won this past weekend in the Super Wild Card playoffs. Those 49er fans, Cowboy fans, Giants, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Buffalo Bills. They live to see another week in the playoffs.
Yes, go Cowboys.
So let's get to our order of business for the day, Jimmy. Dr. King, the preeminent Dr. King. Um, the question is, where do we start with the legacy that Dr. King? I mean, I would probably not be overstating that Dr. King is probably the most influential personality, not just in American history, but one of the most influential leaders in the world. God rest his soul.
Yeah, Tom. So when you have someone who can speak honestly from the heart, can speak about injustice and approach approach the effort to correct it by using the word of God and the word of love, then you have potential for a very powerful movement which he led. Um, I submit that if Dr. King was alive today, that he would not have the same impact on the people of today as he did, back then. Um, one reason for that, Tom, is that black people had a sense and a somewhat of a feeling of obligation to help demonstrate to our enemies that they were wrong. And they did it in a way that did not include resort of the violence to make their point. Um, you know, the violence that was inflicted upon them was put on television so the world could see it. And it was documented and memorialized for all to see forever. You saw the inhumanity of what mankind was capable of when their hatred exceeded everything else. Um, that helped bring about some changes in America that made them a somewhat better nation. I'm not sure, Tom, if the people today have that same desire, would go through the same things that our ancestors went through. You're talking about water cannons, rubber bullets, real bullets, attack dogs, um, being hanged, lynched, thrown in jail, um, being treated not just less than a person, but almost subhuman. Um, and so when you're talking about having to stand up to all of that, Tom, and still be able to put your best clothes on, go out and march, hold your head up with some dignity, and confront those who are the vitriol hatred being directed at you with no limits, no bounds on it. I mean, we you get a chance to really see just how um, evil a person can be when there's no bounds on their hatred. When it's all allowed to just flow out in any way, in any capacity that they want it to be demonstrated. And this is what our ancestors faced, Tom. And I'm not sure that we are strong enough mentally, emotionally, spiritually if we had to endure that today, if we could.
Well, Jimmy, there are certain things that I definitely would have to agree with you on. One of the things that we always have to take into mind is context in terms of our will, our collective will to do certain things. And when we look at um, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think what there are a couple of things that stand out about our leaders, our great leaders at that point, is that Dr. Martin Luther King was actually very young when he came into prominence, when he became a target of not just those who were anti freedom for Black people, those who were anti desegregation. But Jimmy, he, with his oratory and with his intelligence, was able to ultimately shift the nation in terms of its direction and literally shame this country into living up to its principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everyone. What's not lost on me is that Black America was still very much segregated by de facto law. And what you have to understand is that when we start talking about the Montgomery bus boycott in the early 1950s, which was economic, an economic initiative in order to make change in this country, this was the 50s. We had no civil rights legislation that was so called passed and enforced nationwide. This was before the Voting Rights Act. This was before the housing legislation that was passed, basically outlawing segregation in housing, Jimmy. And this was in the 50s. Of course, we look at the great speeches that Dr. King made on the Mall in Washington later in his life. And Jimmy, even earlier today, I listened to, his last sermon before we lost Dr. King and, his priorities, because he went through this evolution and this change in life. Of course, everybody knows him from being, one of the preeminent leaders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Of course, he pastored his church that his father pastored, but every day he put his life on the line. And what is lost on a lot of people in the 21st century, I would probably even guess to say even the 20th century, is that the Dr. King that most folks, especially the corporate community and especially government, celebrated today is not the same Dr. King that was being attacked by folks within the mob community of this country, even by the government. Dr. King was not a loved personality. when he was fighting for freedom and justice for everybody else, Jimmy. He was hated. Um, if you talk to our parents, our older parents, and our grandparents, he was not the beloved humanitarian that we celebrate today, Jimmy. And that's something that we have to make sure that we bear in mind when we look at the messaging and the narrative that mainstream America puts around Dr. King and a lot of our great leaders of that day. A lot of it is sanitized. A lot of it is very sanitized, Jimmy.
So let me one small correction, Tom. There are
Okay.
actually three civil and voting rights acts
Correct.
passed for the
Correct.
'60s,
Correct.
mostly by Republicans, and one and even in '56 by Eisenhower. So I know we tend to only focus on the ones that were passed in the '60s
Mhm.
when we say the Voting Rights Act or the Civil Rights Act, but there were other acts before that. But what you say, Tom, is actually true. There were many who thought, King and his activities was only stirring up trouble and inviting trouble when we should really just let things run its course. I will say this, Tom, that you mentioned the bus boycott. It took a lot for those people, whoever had cars or a truck, any kind of modes of transportation, to volunteer to help give rides to people. People actually came together to help each other out, um, and to do that for a year. And I don't think I ever saw any clips or any videos of people complaining about not being reimbursed for gas for their car because they went and picked up 10 or 15 people to help them get to work since they couldn't catch the bus. And so that's the kind of cooperation and coming together that obviously the church was central to that time that we don't see and we don't have that kind of cohesiveness today. If we had a problem like that, if DART stopped busing down into South Dallas or Oak Cliff or to other areas where there's a large number of black people, what would black folks do besides complain and cry? Would we be able to come together and say, hey, we're going to ride this out. For those of us that have cars and some kind of transportation, we're going to help our neighbors out who don't, and we're going to, do this until and boycott the system until they put in more routes or treat us fairly or meet our demands. So I don't think we'd have the stomach today, Tom, to come together and do that. There would be far too many of us that would be selfish about our cars, about people being in our cars, having to go out of your way to drop somebody off, worried about who's going to reimburse you for gas, even though gas is pretty high, I understand. Um, or who's going to pay my car note, insurance, or repairs. So, with all that being said, Tom, I'm glad that history unfolded the way it did at that time, as opposed to trying to create those same efforts today if we had to deal with those kind of problems.
Yeah, Jimmy, those are very salient points that you bring to the table there. Um, there's a lot to unpack, more than we could address in one night's show. But for those who are here tonight, we want to thank you for joining us. And before we delve a little bit further in this conversation, we of course would like to ask you that you have not done so already. Make sure that you subscribe to Black Men
Yeah.
Speak. If you have not done so, make sure that you like this particular item and share it with other folks. If you hear something that you like and that you feel it should be shared, we are focused on those issues that address our community. We are not here for play, Jimmy.
Yes. And please do those things in those orders. We are still being shadow banned by YouTube for some reason. They just restored our some of our videos today. We still have someone who's complaining about our show, following complaints. And let me say this, Tom. I'm going to just break away
Put
for
it
a
out there.
whoever you are, man or woman. You know what? Our chat lines are open. Our phone line is open. If you have a complaint, if you have something that you really want to voice, complain about this show, call that phone line and we'll let you on the show and you can say whatever you have to say to us directly, adult to adult. if you want to, you're brave enough. We'll even schedule a special show and invite you on as a guest. You can tell us what your complaints are, and really why you're opposing our show. Um, that would be the adult way to deal with this. Continue to file complaints against a show that's only trying to motivate people to be the best versions of themselves, to lift themselves up out of poverty and out of ignorance, and to make a better life for themselves and the community and for the nation as a whole, cannot be a threat to anyone. So whoever you are, you know who you are. If you're not man or woman enough to come on this show and confront us, please put a stop to this silliness of filing these silly complaints. Because all you're doing is you're really not achieving your goal. Eventually, YouTube will put whatever videos you complain about back online and make them available. We are still being shadow banned, although I'm told that will stop today, but we will see. But we're going to continue this show and this platform, and we're going to continue to speak the truth as we see it. So you're not going to put a stop to our voice, no matter how hard you try. That being
All
said,
right.
Tom, let's get back to the show.
All right. So back to Dr. King, the drum major for justice,
Yeah.
the advocate for nonviolent change in our country. And we've talked about this offline, Jimmy, because there were several segments of this struggle, and Dr. King is just one of many of our great leaders in this country who fought for freedom, justice, and equality for our people, for all people, but ours in particular, because of course, we are the only group of people who were enslaved in this country for 250 some odd years, so to speak. So when we look at the legacy of Dr. King, what we've learned and what that means to us, Jimmy, is that number one, as a man, he gave his life, he gave everything to ensure that his children and his children's children and everyone within not just our community, but in all communities would have a voice in this democracy. Um, you know, Coming up, being young, having the platform that he was targeted, Jimmy. He was hated by many. But it wasn't until there were alternatives that we've also talked about, the likes of a Malcolm X, the likes that came a little bit later of the Black Panther Party, that they began to, and I say they, meaning mainstream America and their news media began to reshape the image and the branding of Dr. King from being an agitator to so-called America to being more of a more palatable, digestible face to Black America, peaceful, nonviolent, focused on areas that they were uncomfortable with first. But when they looked at the alternative, who quite frankly, Jimmy, was more like those Americans, then Dr. King became a lot more digestible and he began to be elevated as the friend of mainstream America, not the enemy.
Well, Tom, I think at some point, I think the powers that be saw that was going to be the needed direction, evolution for this. The problem with Dr. King and for others is that as long as you're dealing with political issues, social issues, um, you can be tolerated. I mean, there are things we can negotiate and talk about. But when you get to the money, and the money becomes a real power. So we start talking about economics, Tom, and we start talking about boycotts, and we start talking about trying to do for yourself. When it comes to the money, that can't be interrupted. There's a spending patterns that exist now. It's taken a very long time to shape those patterns. You don't get people to just easily spend their money when they're used to working and saving their money, for example. It takes a lot of money, a lot of capital to change your thinking, your ways and your patterns. And so, Tom, I think that when you look throughout history, be it Marcus Garvey, be it Malcolm X, even being Dr. King,
Mhm.
even the Black Panther Party, for example. Um, when they were just holding waving guns and walking up, going to the Capitol, that's one
Weren't
thing.
hurting anybody. Weren't hurting anybody. They were
You know,
protecting and defending their communities.
but when you start, opening your own hospital, doing your own schools, having lunch programs, and you start talking about control the economies of your neighborhood,
Mhm.
that's when you become more dangerous to the system, and you have to be taken out. So the message seems to be, as long as you're only dealing with social issues, only you're dealing with racism, hiring practices, social norms. Okay, who cares? But you're talking about disrupting the money, that's gonna create a problem. So, in time, that's where we are today. We understand that the economics of the problem is what we have to deal with, but we can't get any kind of momentum started. We can't get the ball rolling. There is no catalyst to push us in that right direction, because I think everyone realizes that those who came before us who tried have all ended up in the early death.
Jimmy, and to your point and pushing it out a little bit further, is as long as you are begging, as long as you are complaining to a group of people that own the system, that control the system, everything is okay. What you would call a, I guess, benevolent benefactor of some sort, everything is okay. But when you begin to build your own systems, when you begin to build your own economies, when you begin to start building the infrastructure where you have control of your economy, you begin to have control over your destiny, then I would agree with you, Jimmy. That, of course, is why they imprisoned the great Marcus Garvey as well, because he was building the infrastructure for an economy controlled by Black folks.
Well, that is true, Tom, and not just with the organization or the newspaper, but when you start talking about getting the shipping and international trade, so now you become a threat to the current system. And Tom, I think this is where we find ourselves today, and this is why we don't do justice to the legacy of those who came before us, especially Dr. King. Um, we need to be further along than what we are. We should be engaged in international trade around the globe with other black people, at minimum with other black people. There are too many black folks around the world for us not to be able to come together and at least do trade together. It doesn't mean we have to love each other. It doesn't mean we have to like each other. But we do need to respect each other and value each other and be able to trade with each other. That's something that we should be able to do, Tom. Um, but somehow, I don't know, we're not listening to those inner voices within us that are telling us the right thing to do. There's no MLK today that are trying to motivate us to do the right thing. The voices today are telling us to be thugs, to be gangsters, to be pimps, to not work, put our women out there in front, to be lazy men, and somehow not care about anybody other than ourselves, how much bling that we can get, what kind of ride we can get, and how we can play the role of being powerful and successful, even though we don't, as my uncle would say, don't have two pennies to rub together.
Well, Jimmy, that's interesting that you bring that point up, because in most of our movements, unfortunately, even beginning with the period where our ancestors were enslaved, most of our movements, most of our revolutions were foiled by someone that we would call in the hood a sellout. And that is someone who would basically rat on someone who was trying to lead our people to freedom and or prosperity. And to your point, when you talk about, you know, worshiping money, or what the good book would say, mammon, the question then becomes, you know what? You may have individual prosperity, but for groups who are successful in this country and or in the world, unity become first. Unity comes first. And I would agree with you, is that we're not going to agree on everything. Jimmy, you and I don't agree on
Right.
everything, but what we do agree on is the end game that we're trying to get to. And so what we do is we begin to compromise, just like those countries did, who were literally warring with each other to figure out who was going to get this part of Africa, who was going to get that part of Africa in order to become wealthy nations. And then, they had this conference that they called the Berlin Conference. Look it up for yourself. I believe it was around 1885. And then they sat down at a table. began to think strategically and figured out how they could put their individual differences aside so that they could all become prosperous and wealthy. And that is exactly what they did. And so, the thing that we have to learn about this, and Dr. King was very prodigious about what he said and what he didn't say. And one thing that we have to stop doing, which is a part of the legacy of Dr. King, is that we cannot continue to attack each other when we're all being attacked. We
Right.
cannot continue to break down each other when we're already being broken down by a larger force, Jimmy. There are certain things that were very, very strategic in his thinking. And he knew that he was not going to live to see the things that he was fighting for come to fruition, but he was willing to sacrifice his life, literally time with his family, and his freedom to a certain degree for something that he was never going to see. And that is what we have to understand, and that is what we have to learn in order to become a great nation, a great economy.
So I think that he saw progress being made, that some that the efforts were not in vain. And I think this is his point that climbing a mountain is not an easy task. Protesting and fighting against injustice is not an easy task. But as he so eloquently put it, he's climbed the mountain, he's seen the promised land. And may not get there with you. And so I think that was his recognition that, yeah, I'm not going to live long enough to see it all come to fruition, but I've seen what it could be and where we're headed. Unfortunately, Tom, he didn't live long enough to see that, whatever he saw as the promised land, we've detoured off that path and went a totally different direction. That's not to say that Black folks have not achieved some success in America, because we have, but the goal and the point of it all was not for a few handful to make it to the promised land. I believe that the effort was for all people, regardless of color, who are catching hell to somehow make it to the promised land. And we're not there yet, Tom. And that dream of fighting for collective unity as a group has been replaced with everybody for themselves and God for every man.
Jimmy, when you say that, it makes me think, for those of you who open the Bible every now and again, about the story of Moses and how he led his people to the precipice of the land of milk and honey. And not getting deep into that scripture, but for those of you out there who open your Bibles every now and again, you know what and who I'm talking about. And God told him, you know what? You're not going to actually occupy, you
Right.
personally
You're
are
not
not
going
going to
to
occupy
deliver your people.
the land that I promised to your forefathers, the Abraham and the Isaac and the Moses, but you're going to get them there. You're going to get the message. You're going to build the platform in order to get them there. And so I see a huge parallel between the work and the life and the legacy of a Dr. Martin Luther King and what you see in the Bible in Moses, because it wasn't Moses who actually went and led
That's
his
correct.
people to occupy. It was Joshua and it was Caleb. And, the question is, Jimmy, and this may be for another conversation, who is that Joshua
Thank
and
you. I
who
was
was
going to
that,
say
who
that,
was that
Tom. There's no
Joshua
Joshua today.
and who was that Joshua and who are those Moseses that are leading us into the promised land? Because, at the end of the day, Jimmy, it's biblical, it is spiritual,
Right.
and Dr. King, was our Moses, or the Moses of that point in time. And so we have to have those Joshuas, we have to have those Calebs that are going to lead the people. And more importantly, Jimmy, it's something that values we have to build into our culture. And the direction from a culture standpoint, Jimmy, is another conversation for another day, Jimmy, because that is probably, when you look at the story of the Jews and what happened, after they went into the promised land and what happened there, they're just very, very interesting parallels. But let's kind of close out our conversation the next few minutes on Dr. King before we go into our next story about what is the most important thing learned and what do we have to do moving forward. I mean, Dr. King's last sermon that I listened to again today, and he said that the three evils that we have to address is number one, racism, number two, poverty, and number three, unjust wars in this country. He made a statement that I thought was amazing. And this was in 1968. When we were in the war in Vietnam, we were spending at that point in time almost $500 million for every Vietnamese that was killed, but only $53 in trying to help the poor in this country. And so he was setting in context the magnitude of the wealth and power that this country have, but where we're actually investing that money.
Well, Tom, those are very valid points that Dr. King made, and I think we've certainly come a long way in the racism front. Um, no one wants to be called a racist, and certainly that doesn't mean that we still don't deal with racism in its purest form. We do, and I think there will always be racism in some
Yeah,
form or fashion,
yeah.
because people who practice it are just ignorant people, and you're not going to get rid of ignorant people ever. So there always going to be some. So, um, and then as far as wars are concerned, we have to. This where Dr. King may have not fully understood the nature of this country. We are a warrior nation, Tom. We fought to gain this land. We're not giving it back from those who we took it from, whatever means that were necessary to get it, smallpox, through the gun, through war, whatever it's going to take, a fake war with Mexico to get their territory and the Californians away from them, to pretty much underpay for Alaska from the Russians. We outright took the Hawaiian Islands from the royal family of Hawaii. That was the U.S. government and the Dole family from Dole pineapple juices. So and we don't regret anything that we've done to form this nation. Whatever had to be done is what we had to do, to include slavery, which we talked about before. But we are a warrior nation, Tom. We have to understand that that's our nature. If we're not at war with each other, we're going to be at war with somebody. And so either America is fighting against its own self, um, or we're finding someone abroad to fight against. But we're always fighting. And somehow our nature is not a socialist commune where we are going to be too focused and heavily resourced on lifting people up out of poverty. That's not who we are. That's never been our nature. It's either you work together to find a way to uplift you and your group, or you find a way to uplift yourself. But under no circumstance are you going to get a great deal of help from this government unless you're wealthy and you're rich and you're powerful and you don't really need the help, but we're there for you anyway to help you because you've proven that you're a winner. For
Well,
people that the country considered losers, i.e. poor people, yeah, you get nothing but lip service. You get what the African congregation that came here a couple of weeks ago is going to get. You get what other groups, disparaged groups, have received from this country. A lot of promises, enough help to keep you dependent on the system, so you're not a threat to come up and overtake. And so whatever help you do get, Tom, that's a way of those at the top are just refunding money back to themselves and to keep you pacified. I'd rather give you a few dollars, help you get by today. Whatever you spend the dollars on is going to come right back to me anyway, because I own everything on all of the commerce. So it's going to come back to me anyway. It's going to come back to the government in the form of taxes. And then you'll have just enough to keep you alive and pacified. So I don't have to worry about you rising up when you do that internal fight yeah, we're putting that fire out first, and then whatever we have to spend externally abroad is what we're gonna do because that's who we are.
Well, there's a we and there's a they in that, and so I'll let the audience determine who's the we and the they are in terms of that warrior nation. And number two,
Okay.
there are a lot of people, Jimmy, who came over here with absolutely nothing, and the government did give away. I mean, because at that point in time, we were agrarian-based economy. There was some technology, but they used, the backs of our ancestors as their technology for labor, because obviously we were not in the industrial age or the information age. We were in the agrarian age. And so it was really about really tearing down the land, building crops, and building economies, not just for initially the European countries, but ultimately America. And, there were millions of acres of land that was given away. And that's, for
Where
these
is it
folks,
today, Tom?
well, Jimmy, if when we talk about this, pull yourself up by the bootstrap stuff, we don't want to lose the fact that the government gave
Where
millions of
where
acres.
are those millions of acres today, Tom? We
Those,
haven't
they,
created.
they, Jimmy,
We haven't created new
Jimmy,
land.
those are acres that were here that were unsettled that were given away.
Okay, well, Tom, I'm saying where are they? Where are those acres today? Those same acres that existed
Mhm.
100 years ago, 150 years ago, still
They're,
exist
they're,
today.
no,
All,
Jimmy.
all, all, all,
Jimmy, a lot of that land is now developed. A lot
hold
of
on,
that,
Tom. That's the
a lot
point.
of that, Jimmy, is now
So
wealth.
all you really did was open the floodgates to move population centers to areas that you needed cleared and developed. And once that was done, those in power with the wealth are going to get the land. They're going to end up with it all anyway. So you look at the land today. Either owned by the federal government, state governments, or wealthy individuals.
Mhm.
Very little of that land that you're talking about, millions upon millions of acres of land, is now in the hands of a few wealthy people. So when the government says we're going to open those floodgates in all that territory out there in New Mexico, okay, go out there and clear the land, develop it, and in the end, we're going to come and put roads in, a sewage system, and oh, by the way, all the wealthy people are going to buy up the land, or we're going to confiscate it and sell it to them or give it to them, and in the end, whatever billionaire class that exists today is only going to become richer, and whoever was there initially to clear the land, you're going to be displaced and put off, and you will no longer own the land 2 or 3 generations from now. Promise you. The system is not designed, Tom. When the government gives away with one hand, they're going to take it away with another, and they're going to give it to those that, when they're picking the winners and the losers, poor people that you have to give stuff to are not the winners. They never will be. So whatever I give
There
you
was
here, I'm going to take it back over here. I promise you.
there's government wealth, there's corporate wealth, and then there's private wealth. I'm not going to disagree with you in terms of what the government is going to take, because obviously it has the law and it has the military on its side. You have corporate wealth, obviously, and then you have private wealth. But all that being said is, whether you look in the Midwest, whether you look, at the far West, millions of acres of land were given away for people to develop and to build wealth, because that was what wealth was. You had some land and you had some slaves, you could build your wealth. But there was one group of people who had limited to very no or practically no access to that wealth. And then if they got it, somebody could take it from them, and they were less likely to get any protection from the law in order to build their wealth with that land that supposedly was available to anybody in order to gain their freedom.
Yeah,
And that's the
well,
only point, because we're right about 8:40, so we want to make sure we
yeah,
spend a little
let's
time
transition to our
on the
next
second.
story,
But
Tom.
at the
We'll
end of the
come
day,
back to the
Jimmy,
wealth of America, the distribution of it. We've talked about it a couple of times before,
right?
but trust me, whatever, if the government is ever giving you something, trust me, they've already figured out how they're going to get it back. Or those who prompt them to give you something have figured out how to get it back. So, but anyway, with that being said, let's talk about Haiti to some degree, Tom. And before we get started, here's my question, Tom. This is what I'm curious. Um, $4 billion was raised. A lot of that from came from America, but there are other countries that pledged money also. And that's what I know about publicly. I'm not sure about other private donations that may have been in kind gifts. But how in the world you raise over $4 billion to help rebuild a little poor nation like Haiti, and somehow in the end we have nothing to show for it.
It depends on whose hands, obviously, you put it into,
It
Jimmy.
wasn't in my hands, Tom. They didn't
I
give me the
understand.
money or you.
Right.
I'm thinking if they had given the money to us to go rebuild Haiti, we would actually build something.
Well,
Um,
I don't know if you're going to build very much with $4 million in a country that is bad shape, but it would be a start.
Tom, $4 billion in Haiti, you could almost rebuild that whole nation. You would put a lot of people to work on public works projects, and for the Clintons and the Bushes, no one's even asked today. A lot of the Haitians have asked. I know that there were a lot of protests um, asking where the money go, and they have a rightful claim. And Tom, I'm curious too. That is not one of the richest nations in the world.
It's the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere.
And so if it was, I'm trying to think of one of the Scandinavian countries, and maybe Denmark, and maybe Switzerland was like the fifth richest. Um, it may have been Denmark that had the highest income in the world and one of the richest places in the world. But Tom, that's not Haiti. $4 billion plus. I'm thinking you could buy the whole island, half the island for $4 billion. You should have been able to develop quite a bit for $4 billion. How do you go through $4 billion and all you end up with is a soccer stadium that no one can go to or afford to go to? I'm not sure, what happened there and why the powers that be, why black people here aren't upset about this dismal track record.
That's because, Jimmy, unfortunately, when you don't have a strong black medium, when you don't have infrastructure for strong black media, they're not going to focus on the issues that are important to you and or your community globally. And as a result, Jimmy, things like this, people don't hear about because it's not important to mainstream America because they don't really have a particular vested interest in it. Most folks know about many of the atrocities that have gone on in Haiti. The huge the earthquake that literally brought the country to its knees in 2010. I think it was a 7.0 magnitude earthquake.
Right.
More recently, obviously, you look at the outright assassination of his president, Jovenel Moise. I mean, murdered in his bed, literally laying next to his wife. Somebody called in mercenaries, most of them
And
from
whatever
Colombia.
happened to those group of mercenaries, Tom?
Nothing, Jimmy. Nothing. They
'Cause I
have
haven't
not.
heard. I mean, I heard about some arrests. I'm not anybody any convictions.
Nothing has happened to them.
I heard one guy started to say, hey, yeah, well, this was organized and funded by the CIA, and then all of a sudden the story went away. You didn't hear anything else about it after that. And now, Tom, I hear that the gangs control 60% of Haiti, and they're fighting among themselves for even more control. No elections have taken place. There are no elected officials in charge.
Left. Yes.
The Dominican Republic is kicking people, Haitians, out of
Back.
their country.
Back. Exactly.
Um,
Back to Haiti.
yeah, deporting them back, even children. I know the
Yes.
UN has asked them to stop because deporting children and vulnerable people back to a country where nobody's running the country but the gangs, it's not a good situation. And then I hear our State Department has, laxed the rules some to issue temporary visas if you can apply for one and somehow find the money to get here. Cruise ships, Tom, are rescuing people who are trying to cross and get to America on boats and floats. I can see the Cubans who only have a 90-mile trip trying to do that, and that's even extremely dangerous for them to do. When you're trying to go several hundred miles, I think Haiti DR is what 400 or 500 miles from the southern tip of Florida. That's not an easy passage. Time to do in a raft or a boat that's overcrowded. But just how desperate people are to get off that island.
Well, when you consider the fact that I believe there's estimated to be somewhere upwards to 150 different gangs who are fighting for control over the territory, in Haiti, at some point or another. They have no money, so they kidnap people and ask for ransom. And literally anybody, their own countrymen and countrywomen, they just kidnap people and force them to, pay a ransom or they kill them. I mean, no rhyme or reason, but that is their income between that. And obviously they have, some financiers on the back end as well. They provide their services for protection, I guess, for those political leaders who are there. And so literally it is like the dark ages, gang violence. And there is really no government infrastructure left literally to gain control of the country right now. Nobody's paying attention. Nobody's talking about it. But we find some little small country on the other side of the world that there's a so-called threat to democracy, and we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars. We've already sent over $50 billion to Ukraine, of course, for the ongoing war in there. Of course, I understand that we have strategic interests there, but at the end of the day, we're a country that says we are pro-democracy, but we have done our best as a country, not as a people individually, but between the United States and the Western powers, they've done as much as they can to keep Haiti destabilized. But then that's going back to the history of how Haiti became Haiti.
Right. Yeah, there's still some punishment taking place because of the way that they became free. And also, if you look at history, Tom, Haiti pretty much was the catalyst for bringing about the end of slavery as we knew it in the West.
Yes.
The way we practiced it. That was a tipping point. That was a precipice for the decline, of bringing an end to it. One, they scared the Brits. They beat the French. They got a lot of Western powers out of the slave trade, even though they didn't practice it. The Brits and Americans decided to team up to end slavery, exporting slaves out of Africa, even though America was still practicing slavery at the time. But we knew that at that point there was a light somewhere where we knew slavery was going to end at some point, just didn't know how or when. But the point is that you're right. I think the Haitians are still being blamed for the way they brought this about. But Tom, I would not be opposed if there were some freedom fighters organized in Haiti and for us to back them and arm them to take control of the country, to go fight the gangs and restore democracy and control back to the people for the island. And if there are some groups out there that the CIA could start working with, to start training, to fund, and to arm, to get this done. Because else time, I don't see anybody that's going to send a troop to Haiti to restore order. So if the Haitian people don't somehow come together and do it themselves, then you're pretty much looking at a permanent south side of Chicago.
Worse, Jimmy, than the
Worse
south
than
side of
Chicago, yeah.
This is probably 10x
At least
worse.
Chicago has a few stoplights.
I mean, Jimmy, it's criminal when you look at what's going on there. I mean, the gangs there are really pushing the law enforcement agencies. So you have the Haitian National Police.
They killed the chief of police.
Yeah.
The cops are not even safe there.
Exactly, Jimmy. And I mean, I was looking at a report on U.S. investment in Haiti. Jimmy, this is what I would consider to be shameful. But somehow they seem to make this some highlight that over a 10-year period from 2010 to 2020, which is just 2 years ago, that the U.S. provided somewhere about $312 million to strengthen law enforcement over a 10-year period, $312 million chunk of money over 10 years. That's a little bit over $30 million a year.
Tom, at least that's an increase over the 20 million that was pledged to 49 African nations. You work the money out over a 20-year period, it works out to about $20 million a year. So that doesn't surprise me, Tom.
Now, Jimmy, when we begin to have our discussions on the Congressional Black Caucus, when we have our discussion about our political agenda, And what we, as a group of citizens, law-abiding citizens who pay our taxes, have to push our legislators, the folks who represent us in Congress, and Black folks in particular, when we talk about our agenda, when we look at the destabilization, because we talked about this last week, Jimmy, our state of affairs in this country is not that dissimilar to our state of affairs on the African continent, in the Caribbean, in South America. And so this is where we have to raise our hand and say, you know what? Are we not our brother's keeper? Because where they are, we could be.
Right.
And so this is where we have to start making phone calls, writing letters to the folks who represent us in the state and in Washington, D.C., to say, you know what? We voted on you. You got to do something about this. We shouldn't expect anybody else to do this, Jimmy. This is our job.
Well, Tom, it truly is. And this is how, one, you look at the Black Congressional Caucus, 50 plus members. I think we have Cory Booker, who's probably a Democrat, a Black Democrat in the Senate. But things are so tight, Tom, that it takes a party with all their votes aligned to get something moving. And so here's where black folks in Congress, Cory Booker, for example, one vote in the Senate. This is how tight things are. It's a 49-51 sort of one independent with Bernie Sanders. Now I guess two with the Arizona senator declaring her independence also. So you're really talking about 49 Republicans, 49 Democrats, and two independents. And so Cory Booker, his one vote, Tom, can make a difference on whether you get to 50 or not. And so how much power is that? Cory Booker could demand that, I'm not going to vote for anything unless something is done about Haiti. I'm not going to vote for anything unless something is done to fix inner city schools or to help those who are really, at the bottom of the totem pole who need some help, who've been so beaten down that they don't see, there's no path for them on their own to get up out of this hole. Tom, these people have some power more so than they think, especially when politics is close. This is actually Brave's little Labradoodle dog. So don't think we've got another dog in the house. This is her little pet, her dog sitting. But yeah, when things are tight like this, very closely split between the political parties, the Black Congressional Caucus then can easily be the tie vote or the votes that get you over the hump, one way or the other. And they should leverage that power time to get some things done and stop cowering down to the white power structure and doing exactly what you're told to do. At some point, stand up for the people who voted you in office and do something with that and with the leverage that they've given you and do something positive with it.
Well, Jimmy, that's where we have to put pressure on them to do that. We have to write letters. We have to make calls. We have to show up on their door. And, that's our job. We can't expect any other group of people to advocate for things that are important to us. And for those who don't know about what's going on in Haiti, what's been going on in Haiti, do the research yourself.
Just a simple Google search. You see story after story about how bad things are. If you thought Chicago was bad, Chicago becomes a vacation compared to what's going on in Haiti. And right. Tom, we should take an interest in Haiti, if not just for a chance to develop some economic ties. Here's a country that's close, that's millions of Black people. And Tom, this will give us a chance to kick off some international trade between Black economic entrepreneurs here and some business interests there. Because what Haiti needs is dollars. They need wealth coming into that country. They need to be able to produce something, a product or a service to sell back to us and the rest of the world. And Tom, we can work together with them to make that happen. I'm not sure what they have over there to offer the world, but I'm pretty sure we have some pretty smart people here. We can sit down with some entrepreneurs there and work it out.
Yeah, Jimmy, at the end of the day, what the country that we now call Haiti generated the most profit in the world in the late 1700s for the Western powers, Jimmy. You
And
know,
so what was
they
that? Sugar,
yeah,
tobacco.
sugar, coffee, then indigo and cotton. But sugar was its cash crop, generating more profit than any other place. And at one point in time, Jimmy, in the late 1700s, a third of the Atlantic slave trade was going through Haiti. And for those of you, if we're gonna make this real simple, is there anything that you can find that doesn't have sugar in it at this point? This was the most profitable colonized piece of land in the world at one point in time. And unfortunately, now, those countries that it built, France, Spain, the United States, Britain, also as well, they could care less. We have to care, Jimmy. Ultimately, we have to care if nobody else is
You
going
know
to care.
they have Tom. They have some beaches.
They do.
They have some oceanfront property.
Of course they do.
So maybe we start there with trying to develop some of the things you do have. Um, maybe you could build out some tourist areas to
Well,
bring
first
back
thing,
tourism.
I mean, you're right, Jimmy, but the first thing you have to have is stability and control because you have to have safety. And then the only
Yes.
way that you're going to deal with that is to bring in military. Unfortunately, that means foreign aid to bring in military in order to stabilize
There won't be any
the
foreign military coming in, Tom.
what
We can certainly
Jimmy
lobby for aid for Africa. I mean, for Haiti,
Haiti.
but there would have to be somebody
But Jimmy,
organized.
but Jimmy, if you don't have anyone that's going to stabilize the ongoing violence through the gang activity there, what do you think is going to happen to that money?
Well, Tom, you're going to have somebody to organize a troops, freedom fighters, to
Where are
take
these
the country
where,
back.
where, where are these freedom fighters going to come from?
They have to come from Haiti, Tom, but they're not going to. No nation is going to send troops to Haiti to restore peace. It's not going to happen. Nobody, Tom. So the Haitian people are going to have to organize some resistance and then ask for help. Um,
Jimmy, they don't have the military resources to counteract the gang activity. Let's be very
Resources,
clear.
Tom, we can provide.
The gangs in Haiti have more access
That
to
is true.
military resources than the police do.
So you're going to have some freedom fighters to organize CIA trained American weapons supply to go fight the fight. That's all that Tom. No nation is going to send troops. They may send some humanitarian aid. Very few nations are going to send military equipment. They may send some food, some MREs, some blankets, light bulbs, um, but America may be willing to send CIA to help you train freedom fighters and supply some weapons, but America is not going to put boots on the ground to restore order in Haiti. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
So my message, if there are any Haitians who are watching our show, if there's any way some men can come together to form a resistance group, some freedom fighters, that would be the start, Tom. That's where it's going to start. Otherwise,
Otherwise, the United States is not going to send
not going to do a thing, Tom. That's right.
unless they have oil reserves and or mineral rights too. They are not going to send military
If
to
they had
protect
some
the
oil
people.
reserves over there, then yeah, we may put boots on the ground to secure the export, the drilling, depending on how much
Is
money Halliburton
we will
has
extract
invested.
all of our money and wealth, but we don't give a damn about the people.
That's correct, Tom. Absolutely correct.
All right, folks.
You've now come to the right conclusion that we're not in the humanitarian business. We never
We are
have.
not, and we are not in the democracy business.
And so what we
We are in
are
the
in is the business of protecting our investment and making sure that the things that we need, i.e., oil and these other supplies, continue to flow. If you disrupt And then we were talking about the disruption to the process, the money. If you're a disruption to that, then yes, something has to be done. If Haiti in no way is going to disrupt the money process, so they're overlooked, Tom. So, but they may have a chance if they can form some freedom fighters. And the key is that they're going to have to say they're fighting for freedom and fighting for democracy. They say they fight for anything else, then they won't get any support. I promise you on that. But,
And
but,
I
but
and I, and
huh?
I and I hope that everybody is listening to the message that Jimmy is saying, because in essence, whether you are in Haiti, the United States, South America, Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, any place else, we will go get our money, but we don't care about you. Remember that.
That is unfortunately true, Tom. And I wish it was different. Um,
We have
and
to make a difference, which means we have to own our own economy
Black
infrastructure
folks
in
have to
order to
make a
control our
difference,
own
Tom,
destiny.
here.
And
Uh,
that's where we cannot, as we've talked about before, cannot depend on anybody else's
no.
government or any other group of people in order to control access to freedom, wealth, and power.
And Tom, we should gear up for this. This is something that we can do on a small scale. Um, Raise money once again for economic development, but tie that economic development to Black folks here so that we do have some wealth to protect. So if someone does act up in the future, we can say the money supply is being disrupted by these gangs and something needs to be done, and something would be done at that point. But right now, there's no money at stake here. And so, and if we don't come together to develop that economic link between us and Haiti, us and Africa, and us in other places where Black people exist, then it's not going to happen. We have to be
Yeah.
the catalyst, Tom. We have to be the things that we want and envision. We have to make happen. We have to believe that we can do it. That's our strength. Right now, we don't believe that we can do anything but build churches. So maybe that's the key. Maybe we get Potter's House or TD Jake or Antioch or Friendship West to go build a mega church over in Haiti, and maybe that'd be worth fighting for and protecting.
Well, Jimmy, they would have to have money to tithe, and so that would be another problem.
Tom, doesn't every church have a building fund?
Jimmy, if they build a church in Haiti, where are they going to get the money from in order to keep it operating? And if the gangs are controlling everything, what's going to stop those gangs from going over there, kidnapping people and ransoming them for money? That would be
Yeah,
a very short-lived church.
I was just joking, Tom. But I could see the pastors coming back and saying, "Hey, I can't pay my American taxes or bring money back to America because those gangs are kidnapping our patrons and taking the money." So, but no, Tom, they're going to have to organize some freedom fighters, and they're going to have to do this themselves. So there may be a chance that we can help them with military equipment and supplies. It won't be the new stuff; it'll be the surplus stuff in the warehouse. It won't even be the latest M16. It'll be like the M14s or something from Vietnam that are left over. I'm pretty sure we still have some of those, or AK-50, AR-15s that we've confiscated that we'll ship to them with some bullets. But
Well,
they're not.
I say this in jest, but it's partially actually serious. I mean, if this country isn't worth actually helping our people who pay taxes, what is it worth? Because we do pay taxes.
Tom, until we get some vested interest over there, it's worth nothing to us. And so that's why I'm calling for us to pool our money together and actually invest in Haiti and help rebuild it. Don't leave it to the Bushes and the Clintons to take billions of dollars and go over there and lip service. Still don't know what they've built or invested in,
I
but
would say
actually,
this. I would say this, Jimmy. We, as a collective, we would have to push. We would have to leverage what we do have with the Congressional Black Congress to send some real money over there. And part of that is going to have to be military aid so that they can stabilize their government. I
Tom,
don't
you
see
can't
it
send
any
a
other way.
penny over there till you stabilize it.
And that's my point. You can't do. I mean, how are you going to do one without the other?
Right.
How are you going to stabilize the government without military intervention?
Those freedom fighters are going to have to stabilize the first time, and then we'll have to come back with the economic
But they don't
investment.
control the country. The gangs control the country, Jimmy.
And I would certainly say this: that's where those freedom fighters are going to have to take the gangs out, Tom. And I'll say this:
Where are they going to get the weapons?
well, American can send. We got supplies, warehouses full of weapons. We can ship those. Um, but the other point, Tom, is that if you do organize some money to rebuild Haiti, I would highly suggest you get black folks here, entrepreneurs here involved, and you fund it through organizations, nonprofits, through community groups, rather than giving it to a bunch of high-profile people that are only going to funnel the money off to do studies and research and grants and God knows what else, without actually putting any money on the ground.
Gotcha.
So we need money to actually hit the ground and build and put people to work. But we need people here who are overseeing that process and have a link to it to make sure it happens. The Bushes and the Clintons, once the money ran out and they left and walked away from it, Haiti wasn't that much better off than it was before the earthquakes.
And it's worse now, unfortunately, Jimmy.
And it's
So
worse now.
it is a little bit past the top of the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us this evening. Again, we hope you've enjoyed the show. Please do make sure that you subscribe, like, and of course, share this information. We will be back
Share it.
next weekend, where we will have even more conversation on what's impacting our community, Jimmy, because there is no answer for us without unity. We don't have to agree on all the tactics, but we do have to agree on the end game.
There go those Kwanzaa principles popping up again, Tom.
Gotcha.
We just can't get away from it.
I got you. Well, you know what? They're gonna be out there, Jimmy. We just have to keep it moving.
So, all right. Until next week.